Hey, we're going to jump back in, playing around a little bit with the stage. I like to call it because that helps us think about um, placement, orientation, spatial relationships, and the actors that are going to be on this stage. Um, first thing I want to do is get into a new comp. I'm going to create my new comp, and I'll call it 3D space 2. Still thinking about HD environments, 1920 by 1080. And I'm only going to go 5 seconds on this one. So now that we have a basic understanding of just coordinates and access to different attributes with these elements and assets in a three-dimensional environment, let's kind of play with orchestrating a few things together. So I'm going to go back into another new solid from my layer menu, and I'm going to try to make a floor. So if I know that my composition is 1920 pixels wide, I should at least start there. I think this is a good thing to do because we can kind of take a look and see how these things are going to behave in this world. So easiest thing to do, instead of having to punch in numbers at this point, would just be able to say, let's make this the comp size. And I'm also going to get rid of some color for now. I want to stay neutral, but I don't want to go with absolute white, and I don't want to go with an absolute black. I just kind of want to go with a middle gray. So somewhere along this edge. And you can see that my R, my G, my B are all the same value. And comp size is done. Okay, so right off the bat, new solid, it's going to be filling my screen because I told it to. It's also only 2 dimensions. If I hit P for position, it tells me that I am, again, at the middle of my comp, 960, 540. But I want to make this a 3D element, so I'm going to go ahead and click my 3D switch. And now I can see that I've got more access to 3-dimensional coordinates, X, Y, and Z. This being a floor, I want to rotate it. Which axis should I rotate it on if I want to go like this? So you kind of have to start thinking about what our different axes are. We have X, we have Y, and we have Z. So I recommend just trying to spin any of them. And this is not found under position, but it's found under orientation or rotation. So if I hit R, it gets rid of position and now tells me that I'm just looking at how this thing is oriented in space. I'm going to skip orientation for now. It's something I just want to get to later. I want us to sort of stick to the basics of rotation because we all understand rotation. Rotation on the X, that is one in which my layer is going to rotate the way that I would hope it to. But if we just want to look and see what the other ones do, Y is going to rotate it on the vertical axis because Y is up and down, that's vertical. And if I was to rotate on the Z, you're going to see that it doesn't really change a perspective value as far as the 3 dimensions go. It just spins it along this axis right here. And it's like a clock turning or something like that. So as I understand that X is my hero, I'm going to select that value, and if I want a floor, I want it to be level. You know, I don't want marbles to roll around on it, just like I'm building a house. So I need it to be turned at 90 degrees. So I'll just click on my degree value there, that attribute, and type in 90 and hit enter. This is where we have to understand the position of things. So since this layer was put in halfway through my X and halfway through my Y, it's dead center, and now I've just rotated it 90 degrees, and my camera is also right at that same center value. So like I was talking in the first video, these layers do not have any volume to them. They're not even paper thin, because you can even see the edge of the paper. They're not even wafer thin, because a wafer it also has volume. So it's just like it's invisible when it is turned at a complete 90. However, if I access my position again, so I just hit P, and I think about where this thing should live for a floor, I can start to change that attribute. So I'm going to use Y because it is my vertical, my up and down. So if I start to increase that value of Y, that means that it's going to start moving away from the top of my comp. The top of my comp is 0. The left of my comp is 0 as far as X and Y goes. You should be able to understand that because you can see it on your screen. The Z part is harder for us to understand because we can't really see where that is on our screen. But I'm just going to take it down to the bottom of my composition, and I know that that's 1080. So I could slide it, or I could just go ahead and click on here and say you are at 1080. And now that layer has moved to the bottom of my screen, and it sort of feels like a floor because I can see some of that perspective. What's interesting though is that I can also see the outline of this, and it's showing me that half of my floor is visible that way and half of it is invisible because it's this way, and my camera only sees half of the floor. This is where we can start to play with things like our anchor point and scale. So the anchor point, which defines the center, or basically the point of manipulation, can be moved. If I hit A for anchor point, you should all know that you don't have to always just hit the buttons for these things. You can just close that little toggle and open it back up again, and it'll show you all your transforms. But it's nice to be clean, also good just get right to what we need. A, anchor point. So the anchor point is currently set to the center of that solid. If I change my anchor point, it's going to change the like the hub of transformation for that solid or for that layer. So if I'm talking about at this point it looks like it's down the Z because it's facing this way, but it really is the Y. About where that orientation is, I can change that value, slide it forwards or backwards, and ultimately what I would like to see is for that Y value to be 0. So I can just type in 0. And now the anchor point for that solid, follow me here, is what used to be the top. But since we've rotated this 90 degrees, it's now like the front. So the front of this solid now has the point in which we could rotate or manipulate things based on where that anchor point is. So it's still in the center as far as X value goes, but I've changed it to be formally the top. So if I just want to do this real quickly all over again, I would just say, let's put in a new solid. It's the same thing. First thing to do would be to change its anchor point to 0. And now you can see that the whole thing moved down halfway because the position of that anchor point, if I hit Shift P, I'll be able to see anchor point and position. Anchor point is set at 0, however, position is still set at 540. So it's saying, hey, this anchor point, which is now sort of the top of that layer, is at 0, but the position of it in space is at 540. It gets a little heavy, but this is good. This is what I want you to wrap your little brains around. Dogs, stop barking. I'm gonna turn that into a 3D element. I'm going to take my X rotation and I'm going to hit 90. And now it's flat again. So then I should know that I can go to my position and say, all right, go to the bottom of this thing, and that is at 1080 and it's back down there. So I'm kind of right back where I was, but I thought it through a little bit so that I'm getting an idea of how these orientation and spatial relationships happen in my project. So if we talk about scale, I'm just going to hit Shift S just so I bring scale into this equation here. Like I said, scale doesn't actually scale in 3D, it scales in 2D. I don't even know why there's a third value there. It matters later once we actually get to some extrusions, but I like to disconnect the link between those different coordinates, because sometimes you say, I want a really deep floor, or I want a really wide floor, or I want variations of both. So if I start to scrub through my X value in scale, it won't affect my Y or my Z. So like right now we can see that this thing does not go all the way across my comp. So as I increase that value, it surely will right now. But what if I want to make this floor really long and super deep? I'm going to take my Y value and I'm going to start pushing it back. And the cool thing about having changed my anchor point first is that now that I changed the scale of my Y, it's just going that way. It's not splitting the difference of like part of it coming this way towards the camera and part of it going that way in space. Sometimes you might want that, but you just need to know when and why. But I can shove this thing way back. I mean, we're talking right now, not even the distance that my comp is wide. I'm only at 1670. My comp, that's not true. 1920. Yeah, I haven't even made 1920 yet. So this thing, I can go all the way, there we go. I'll go to 1920-ish, somewhere close, whatever, it's the 30s. So now that floor is as deep as my composition is wide. It doesn't appear like it as far as what I can see, but that is the result of perspective. And perspective has a huge play on all of the things that we do in 3D. And in this case, it's mostly because of the default camera and the way that the lens and focal distance is actually is handling this. So now I have a floor that is really deep. So this is like looking down a hallway or something like that. But what if I wanted a world? And this was my world, but I needed to make sure the world was like deep and far because I want to go explore things. I can see the edge of this. That's where you'd go back into your scale on its X and potentially make it as wide as you feel you need to. So if I go all the way to, well, I don't even have to go to 1080. I can go to 900 and it's already filling my entire screen. Now I've got this floor that is gigantic. It's deep, it's wide. I can kind of move through it eventually if I want to do some animation or if I want to stage things in this space. And that's fantastic. So if I hit undo, I'm just going to go back to where I was with like a hallway. If I wanted a wall or something that was going to be on a different axis, then I would introduce a new solid. This one I might make just a little bit of a different color just so we can see it. I have to make it 3D. I want to access its anchor point. And I'm going to set the X this time to 0. And then I'm going to access my position attribute and set that to 0. So now I'm back to full screen. However, the point of rotation and the point of interaction is at 0. I've moved that all the way over to 0 as far as our coordinates go. Now if I was to rotate that on the Y, because we want it to pivot that way, I'll go to Y and I'll also hit 90 degrees. Bam. Whoops, I went the wrong way. I need to hit -90, and this is great. Good things to remember, because pivoting one way or the other is how things are going to work here. So now I went negative 90. So instead of a positive, which came this way and was basically off screen, I bent it back around that way with a negative. Just get used to that. It's not that intuitive, but it'll become something that you remember. I've been doing this for a long time, and I just screwed up. So if I look at scale, I can break that scale, and I could say, hey, let's make this almost as long as this thing here, which was like what? I don't know. It was long. So there is a floor and a wall. I could then make another wall and a ceiling. If I took those same ideas and applied them just sort of in the opposite ways, I would have had to move an anchor point to the full 1920 for the next wall, and then pivot it at a positive 90, and then send its scale down. And then the same thing with the ceiling like I did with the floor. Now we're making a room, right? It's hard to tell. Like this kind of looks like we're making different polygons here, but it actually is. There's perspective, there is space. I could end up flying through this corridor and like experience that space. However, since it's all solid, there's no lights in here, it'd be really hard to tell if we were even moving. We'll get there eventually. So play around with that. Definitely experiment, fail, succeed, fail, whatever. Just keep trying. Get your hands in there, and you'll get the hang of this real quick, and then we can move on to even more cool things.